Hello everybody and welcome back to the Maniacal Mini. Today we are working on Brutogg Corpse-Eater from the Cursed City box set. The first thing I did was a zenithal highlight, that is white over black primer from top down. I also added some Nuln oil to re-establish the shadows and then dry brushed white over the top of that, just so we can get a good base point to start off of, since we are going to be using mainly inks and instant colors for this paint job. The first color I'm going to be using is the Phoenix Feather from Scale 75's Instant Colors. I'm going to be doing a review on that box set, on pretty much all those paint sets from the Instant Color selection, because they were kind enough to send me all of them. So I will be doing a review on those probably in the next couple videos. So for right now, we're just going to do a liberal coating all over the skin tone with this Phoenix Feather, and we're going to come back in the next step and add a little bit more detail to the skin. Okay, so now that we have that Phoenix Feather down, we are going to take a 50-50 mix of that Phoenix Feather and Dragon's Blood, and I'm going to start shading into the recesses with this, and that is going to create a more flush looking skin tone, so that it's not so black and dark in the recesses. I wanted to have a little bit more life because he is still alive. So we are going to move on to one more little step for the skin tone in this next step, and that is going to be taking just Phoenix Feather. We're going to discard our 50-50 mix that we had, and we're going to grab Phoenix Feather and Corrupted Stamina, and we're going to deposit this around his eyes, or a little bit around the lips, just to get some more color into the face before we move on to the next step. So the final step for the face here is going to be a Caribert Crimson Wash through the mouth area, and then we're going to start using White Scar to pick out some teeth, and this should help as we move on to make him feel a little bit more alive as we move into the next steps. So that's going to be it for the skin portions. We're going to move on in just a second. So moving on to the leather now, and there is a ton of it on this model. We're going to be using a couple different colors of leather. The first one's going to be Rage Brown from Scale 75 Instant Colors. This is more of a reddish brown. I really like the way it looks around the shoulder that you can see underneath the chainmail that I already covered. Now I'm going to start filling in around these metal plates that are hanging around his waist, and then we're going to move on to a different leather in just a sec, so I'm going to leave you guys right here to hang out and watch. Okay, so the next color that we're going to be using is called Endurance Brown. This is also from Scale 75 Instant Color. This is more of a natural looking leather, so I'm going to be using this on the pouch on his back, as well as the wrappings around his wrist, and any other little leather details that I can pick out as far as that goes. We're going to be moving into the cloth around his pants, as well as those tufts of fur that hang out from underneath his leather, like smock, I guess you would call it, or you know, whatever it is that has the plate mail on it. There is some fur that hangs out underneath there, so we're going to be covering that too in the next couple steps. So since we've been doing a lot of these warm tones, I'm going to bring in a little bit of a cold tone with this Dark Kraken. I'm going to be using that for his pants. This should give a little bit of contrast between the leathers and the metals and the furs, just to break up kind of the monotony of warm colors that we got going on right now. So we're going to move on to the fur in just a second. So all these fur tufts that are hanging down underneath the plate mail, we're going to be just using aggro stoons. This is from Games Workshop. I wanted to use mainly scale 75 for this one, but I'm going to be popping in a couple of other ones just because I really like the look of the aggro stoons on fur. So that's what I decided to use on this one. You guys can use whatever you want though. There's plenty of options from the scale 75 collection of instant colors that would definitely work for this, but like I said, it's up to personal preference, so if you feel like doing a different color, do a different color. Otherwise, we are just going to keep on trucking along. Alright, so we're going to start moving into a little bit of the metal work, and for the first one we are going to do is steel, and for that I'm going to be using black metal from scale 75 as a base coat. This is just going to go over all the chainmail, all the plate mail, the blade of his weapon, as well as the head of the mace that he's holding in his hand, and the helmet that he has on his head. Everything else we're going to be doing bronze and brass a little bit later on for that step. So I'm just going to leave you guys here for a second. We will move on to some shading and a couple of highlight steps. So, since everything else that we have put down so far is so matte, I want to add a little bit of shine to this guy, so I'm going to be using a Nuln Oil Gloss, and this is literally just going to cover everything that we painted in steel. So, the chainmail, the helmet, the weapons, and then we're going to start moving into a couple of highlight steps in just a few minutes. So normally what I would do is I would go, after I shade with a wash, I would go right back to the original color. Since it's such a match when you put the Nuln Oil over that black metal, there's such a matching color, we don't really need to do that. So I'm going to just do a 50-50 mix of the black metal and trash metal, also from the series, just popping on the highlights that would be most towards the light source, which would be from up above. Don't cover everything, because then there's no point in what we just did previously. So we're going to keep building up those highlights as we move along, getting them more and more noticeable, more and more poppy, so that should give us a very awesome look once it's all wrapped up. So we're just going to do a couple more highlights in just a sec. So we are also going to be using that 50-50 mix of black and trash metals to pick out all the studs that are on the leather armor. This is going to be the only step that we're going to do for the studs themselves. Everything else, though, is going to get another coat of highlight. So I'll let you guys watch there, and we'll pick it up in a sec. So moving on to the first highlight is going to be pure trash metal. We're just going to be picking out the few select spots on this armor that would be hitting the sunlight directly. We want to keep it more natural looking metal, and the way to do that is to pick and choose where you think that shine is going to be the brightest and start working your way from the darkest areas down to the lightest, meaning bringing your brush strokes down in that direction so that it deposits the most of the color on top and fades away as you bring it down towards the shadow areas to kind of tie them in together. For our last highlight on the steel portion, we are just going to be using a 50-50 mix of trash metal and heavy metal. This is going to be the topmost highlights, so make sure we're leaving a little bit of all the previous colors that we put down before this one showing. We don't want to cover up all that hard work, but we're just going to be picking out the brightest spots on this steel that we can with the mix of trash metal and heavy metal. Okay, so we're going to start working on the bronze. That is going to be the second metallic portion of this video. As you can see, I'm laying down the decayed metal on his shoulder pad. I'm going to pretty much pick out everything in this decayed metal that isn't already steel. So you can see the shoulder pad, there's a couple of handles on his swords in the back, and just some random other spots. He's got a little knee pad that I put it on, and we're going to start working up in different highlights in just a minute. So we're going to be moving into a 50-50 mix of decayed metal and old copper. I'm not doing a shading step like I did in the last with the steel. We're going right into highlights on this one, so we're going to start focusing on all the areas that the light would be hitting on this model. So that would be the top portion of the bowl shape that is his knee pad. So just that top little corner portion. He's got that shoulder pad that we did, and as well as the actual handle on the blade that he's using to keep it in his hand. I did that in that same decayed metal copper look. So I'm going to pop a couple of highlights on there, try to get that non-metallic metal look. So we'll be able to brighten that up in a couple other steps. So I'm going to leave you there and we'll pick it up in a second. Okay, so now we're going to start moving into our 4 highlight steps. This is the first one of Old Copper. As you can see, I am sticking to the raised edges, leaving some of that decayed metal mix that we put down earlier into the recesses. We don't want to cover everything up because we want to have a nice tonal variation in the colors on this brass and copper. So we're going to keep moving on through this step. We got 3 more highlights after this. I'm going to let you guys hear to watch it, and we will pick it up when we reach that step. For this next step, what I did was I took a little bit of that old copper and made a 50-50 mix with some Victorian brass, thinned it down with a little bit of water to improve that flow, and we are just going to continue to pop on those highlights on the raised portions. We're going to be leaving a little bit of every color that we do in the recesses as we move up, highlighting less and less area as we go along. So I'm going to leave, again, you guys here for a sec to watch the rest of this one before we pick it up in the next one. Okay, as we move into our final 2 highlight steps, we are going to be moving on to pure Victorian brass. As you can see, I'm leaving a lot of our previous colors that we are working through in the recesses so that we can continue that tonal variation of colors. We are making sure that we are sticking to the topmost highlight areas, the most raised edges, keeping our paint nice and thin as we work through because we don't want to overload and flood areas. So I'm going to leave you here, and we will pick it up with one final highlight step before we move on to final details and eventually weathering. And our final highlight is a 50-50 mix of Victorian brass with pure copper. This is going to be the absolute tip of the raised edges all around the model. So make sure that we're not retouching anything that we did earlier. We're just going to go over in all these spots, leaving a lot more of previous colors in the recesses as we start to build up that super noticeable transition that should give a lot of tone and variation once we finish this model. So I'm going to leave you guys here, and we're going to pick it up with some final detail steps and then some weathering. Alright, so we are moving into the final details now before we move into our weathering step. The first thing I'm going to do is the rope that's hanging around his neck. I'm going to be using Sepia Ventus ink from Green Stuff World for that. I usually use this one for all my bones and bone colors. It's just got a really nice coverage, very, very nice tones and variations to the ink. But for now, I'm going to be using it because I think it'll work really well as, you know, more of an old, dirty, faded rope color. So that's what we're going to be using it for today. So I'm going to leave you guys there to watch the rest of this one, and we will pick it up at the next step. bringing in some Savage Beige from Scale 75's Instant Color Selection. I'm just going to be using this to coat the jug that's sitting on his waistband. I was kind of worried about picking a color for this one. I wanted to make it look kind of like old and tattered and, you know, kind of like an ancient relic looking jug. Hopefully this tone will work out in the end once we put, you know, some streaking grime over everything, but for right now I think it looks pretty solid on his waist. But again, we will see how it looks once the weathering step comes. Okay, so now I'm going to be picking out that health flask that's hanging off the rope around his neck. For that I'm going to be using Blood Angels Red contrast paint from Games Workshop. I haven't been able to find a similar red in ink or contrast form that is as good as Blood Angels Red, so I will say that this contrast paint is a staple in my painting. I highly recommend it. It is one of the poppiest, most brightest reds that you can get as far as contrast paint or you know, anything similar range goes. I haven't got a chance to check out the new Army Painter speed paints yet, but hopefully my copy will be coming soon and we will get to try those out as well. But for now, I think that looks pretty solid. We can tell that there's a health flask hanging around his neck, just in case he needs a little pick-me-up as he goes into battle. So we're going to be moving on to the next step in just a second. Moving into the final steps of our finishing details, we are moving into an Elven Gold for this little icon that's hanging off the rope next to the health flask. I chose Elven Gold just because I wanted it to stand out from all the steel and the bronze that we're putting down already, and the Elven Gold just popped the most to me as far as this color scheme goes. So I'm going to be putting that down, and then we're going to be working on the gem in the next couple steps. Okay, so we're going to start off our emblem here. We're taking a little bit of nuclear white from Green Stuff World, and we're just going to coat the entirety of the gem that is sitting inside of this emblem. Just nice even coats. Make sure you're not spreading the paint around too much because white can be a little bit tricky. As we move into the next step, we're just going to cover it with a little coat of the technical paint from Games Workshop. We're going to be using some of that waste in the green. I wanted green because I feel like we had a lot of red in this one, and blue just, it kind of just threw off what I was going for. Green seemed really nice next to that red, so that's why we chose that one. But we're going to move into our final act now, which is the weathering portion. So I'm going to take some streaking grime from AK Interactive, and this is just going to coat over the entire we're going to probably let this dry for just a little bit, just because I wanted to turn everything clear, and usually we like Interactive to dry it, and will help you achieve that color variation in terms of colors. So we're going to pick up on those steps in just a second. reductive, and this is going to go over just the metallic portions of the model. So as you can see, I'm coating the chainmail here, all around there. I already picked out some of the plates. So I'm going to go around and do that, and we're going to take another step in just a second to take off that reductive technique that's going to be a little bit different than we did with the last thing. So I'll let you guys watch that, and I will see you in a second. So now this is going to be a very, what's the word for it? Not very well taken point, but this is hands down, to me, the best oxide that you can buy from Breed Stuff World. It just goes on so well, so smooth, and you only need to just throw it down with just a little bit of water, but the finish that you get from it is absolutely perfect and so realistic. I highly recommend you guys try this one. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drop this into the portions of the model, because that's what we typically see in this oxide oxidization of brass and color. So we're just going to, as you can see, I'm dropping it on the eyes here. That's just going to go so leave it there, and we're going to put it on just the other side. Okay, so no model would be complete without a hefty dose of blood, so living up to this guy's name as the Corpse-Eater, I figured he would be spattered and covered with blood. So I grabbed an old flathead brush here. The bristles are kind of stiff. It's going to make it perfect for the spattering effect. So I'm going to put this where naturally the blood would spatter all across him if he was swinging his mace around. You see I'm going to splatter the mace and the blade a little bit, give it a couple dabs to build up some of that extra. And I'm also going to take a little brush and add a little bit around his mouth so that he can truly live up to his name as the Corpse-Eater. Naturally, he would have blood dripping everywhere. So that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for all the support. I see we're approaching 600 subscribers. That is fucking awesome. Excuse my language. This isn't made for kids anyway, so I hopefully nobody minds. But thank you guys so much for the support. I really appreciate it. I am trying to build up the Patreon page as well as continue to build up the library here on YouTube. So if you are looking for a further way to support, I promise you more content is coming, as well as content coming here. Working another job, so trying to balance time has been a little bit tricky, but we're figuring it out. Thank you guys so much for checking it out. Hope to see you in the next one, and happy painting.